So let's get a little bit more in depth into the Unity editor's interface. This is just an empty scene. This is like if you create a project from scratch, it's going to look like this. I have a bunch of assets in here. You can ignore them because yours will be empty. Let me go back to scene view. So use a mouse in class, or if not in class, at least when you're working, and you're going to have to get used to how to move around. So Alt and left click is for rotating in the scene. Notice that like as I move, I see some icons. This is like, these are the scene objects. Like here's the main camera way over there, and there's some light source somewhere. Oh, it looks like it's above me, but see, it's kind of hard to like hunt around and find stuff. So Alt and left click is rotating is good, but let's say I was like, it's really hard to see the direction. I happen to be too low just in where I currently am. My developer's camera is in the virtual world. So if I press select in the hierarchy what I want to look at, and I move my mouse into the scene view and press the F key. F is for frame up. It frames the camera up on the light source. And now I can see it a lot easier. And Alt and left click. Notice how as I'm rotating around this center point, this focus point. In this case, it's this directional light game object. And notice as I move around, I'm kind of orbiting it like I'm a satellite of it, like I'm the moon orbiting around the Earth. And this is how rotation actually works in 3D space. You need to rotate around something. Yes, you can take an object, and I'm going to press the E key and rotate it. And besides the fact that I'm moving the light source around, that's a little distracting. But notice how I'm just moving this object around its center point. But even that center point is a focal point. It's just the focal point is at the dead center of the object. So it looks like it's just rotating on itself. When I rotate this camera, this object is my center point, and I'm moved off of it. So there's this idea of a pivot point or a center point that you're rotating around. Now, Alt, you can middle mouse scroll wheel, sorry, to zoom in and out. And notice I'm zooming in and out of my focal point. And if I zoom in a lot, and then I hold Alt and left, drag, and I'm rotating now, but I'm rotating around this thing at a closer distance. I'm keeping the distance from the object. If you don't have a mouse, you can do a middle mouse key. You do Alt and right click to zoom as well. And notice I'm zooming on the object I'm framed up on. And then Alt and middle click is called a pan. You're actually moving left, right, up, and down. So this is another type of way to move around your scene. So you can rotate around something, you can zoom on something, and you can pan or like translate or move left, right, up, and down with Alt and the different mouse buttons. Notice as I'm moving around, this gizmo up here is kind of moving to this compass. So we are in a virtual world, a 3D world. We use the X coordinate for understanding. Let me keep rotating until the gizmo kind of looks like this. Notice X is red, Z is blue, Y is green. X in the global sense is negative is talking about moving left, positive is talking about moving right, Y positive is talking about moving up, and negative is moving down. Z is moving forward, and negative is moving back. And if I create an object, so I say game object 3D sphere, and I press the W key for moving. Usually like Q is just a view. W gives you the move tool. E is for rotate. R is for scale. But for right now, we're just moving. W key, and you have to click on something. Notice as I'm moving on the red arrow, we're moving on the X. And the X value, notice up here in the transform on this, let me just call it like Sphere01. This is my sphere game object. I'm moving it left and right. Notice the X value up here in the transform component is moving. The transform component is responsible for keeping track of that scene object's position, rotation, and scaling information within the virtual world. And notice I moved the blue arrow. We're moving that Z value, and green, we're moving it up and down. And you can also use these inner squares to move it 2 axi at once. All right. So when I'm moving my dev camera, it's just kind of hidden from you, but it has like a transform too. It's like moving around the world, it's rotating, orienting itself, and so on. And Modus's gizmo is kind of moving along for the ride. It's showing you we're offsetting from the world orientation. So like world 000 position is like the dead center. Notice this sphere has this position information, and I can reset it and pop it down into world space 0. And it looks like my frame, like since I'm still framed up on the sphere, it looks like I'm still rotating around it, even though it's moved its position. But this is world space 000, dead center of our imaginary world. And I'm moving about it. And since the sphere, you can't really see a rotation, I'll just make like a cube or something, move it over here, press the E key. And you notice as I'm rotating the sphere, I'm rotating about its center point. And I'm rotating that sphere. I could parent the cube underneath the sphere. And now we have a hierarchy relationship. And if I rotate the cube, notice he's still rotating on his center point. But if I rotate the sphere, the cube is inheriting the rotation of the sphere. So now it's orbiting the sphere, the distance from it. So this idea of this kind of, it's almost like the camera gets inherited too, and we're rotating where you set at that set distance from it.
Increase the size of the font.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Just give me 1 second. All right, so while that's resetting, we're talking about the transform and moving a position around and using the scene view as the dev camera to look in. And notice that you can put scene objects underneath each other. You can make them children of each other. You can have any type of nesting of relationships, and the UI will get really nested heavy, I should say, because there's a lot of elements to the UI. But we build one at a time. And I just want you to get used to this idea of the transform component. It's a really important part to understand. This idea of world space, global space. That most things, when you move them and rotate them, will be in the world space. But when you parent stuff, you get this idea of local space or child space. And you can like get interesting. As you see, like you manipulate the parent, and it'll like do this like additive process. The child will inherit the position and rotation information from the parent, and scaling as well. Just check my notes real quick. Yeah, that's about it. So does this look better? It's too big? Okay. Any questions up to this point? All right, so I'll just recreate it quickly. I had a sphere, I'm just kind of positioning it somewhere and a cube, and offsetting the cube from the sphere and just parenting it. And then you can kind of see this parent-child relationship. I'm rotating the sphere, and he's staying on his center because his center point's in the center of the sphere, but he's impacting their children, which there just happens to be one, but you can make more. But you see how it's that cube is staying at the same set distance. It's just kind of rotating around it. Now that I guess we have a sphere open, I'm just going to decouple these. I just want them at different distances, and okay, they happen to, that's good. They happen to be viewable in the game camera. So I was moving them around a lot, but if I just wanted to see, like, here's the camera viewing, and the objects do happen to be in scene. But if they're like off, so here's this global and local orientation. I just want to move it globally. I just want to see the cube is like off. If I keep moving it in the X, you can see, boop, he like leaves viewing, right, range. He's outside the view of the camera. So if that happens, just move. I just want, for this example, I just need a few objects in there viewable. In any case, if I just select one of them, doesn't matter the cube or the sphere, they have a transform component. They kind of have their metadata, their game object data at the top, and they're just, there's the names of them is what's really important. And the transform is the first component that's really interesting or important to look at. And just know that there's these floats, these decimal values that are there for position, rotation, scaling. Now there's some other stuff here. Later in the class, we'll get involved in these components, dealing with the mesh, the geometry, mostly dealing with the materials on them. But all I really want to make note of now is that these, when you come up here and say game object 3D create, you're creating these manually. We're going to start creating these with our code later on. But when you do create them, they're very useful because they have a collider on them. So the cube has this box collider. The sphere has this sphere collider component. And these colliders are very important in the next section because we're going to be using physics to, like, if a user clicks, we're like, wait, where did this user click on the scene in the screen view, in the screen coordinates? And if we use physics to shoot a ray or a vector, a line out into this virtual world, does it hit anything? Because we want to know if we clicked on something. And to be able to know that, they need to have a collider because that makes them like part of the physics system. And the only thing I'm going to do is in assets, I'm just going to go in the scripts folder. And you can just do this anywhere in your assets, but I want you to right click, create. We're going to create our first asset, and it's going to be a C# script. So I click it. It's going to look like this. The name is still like moldable. Like right now we're going to name it. So it's really important to name your C# script now. I'll just call it like Sample02, and I'll talk about later why, but I pressed the enter key and I created it. And notice in the inspector here, it's like, okay, this is a script. And actually here's like, it's showing some of the code that's inside of it. So we created an asset. In this case, it's a C# script. It's a file. It sits on our file drive. It's not active in our project. It's not in our application. It's not running at runtime. But this is the first step toward that. We created this asset. We somehow want to connect it up into our scene objects as a component object so that it can add behavior, it can add functionality to our scene object. Yeah. Oh. So we created this asset, this resource in a project. It's not used. We do wish to make it usable. We do wish to make it as a component object, which is the next lecture.